invite you to turn to Nehemiah chapter 1. Nehemiah chapter 1. And hold your place there. Now, one sister commented, "I've never heard you preach from the book of Nehemiah." And it's been a while. I think it was long overdue. The last time I preached through the book of Nehemiah, we were in I believe it was one of our building campaigns, raising funds to build this building like 10 years ago. And so, like I said, there's been some water under that bridge. So let's get in Nehemiah chapter 1 tonight. Excited about getting back into this inspiring book. 2 years ago, Nathan Oxer and I were heading down I-4 through Tampa, and we were hungry. We wanted something that was fast, and so we saw the Burger King sign off the freeway. We pulled over and parked our car and immediately saw some sketchy characters around this Burger King, but the hunger won out. We approached the door and noticed that there were fingerprints, really greasy fingerprints all over the glass, but the hunger won out. We continued to go in, and we came to the counter, and we saw that nobody was really there, and we kind of had to knock on the counter, or, hey, and somebody finally came up, and as I tried to just order a Wendy's classic burger and just a Frosty, just the bread and butter stuff at Wendy's, they're fumbling with my order. They can't get it straight. And then finally we got it all through and went back to our seats, but we looked around for a table that was actually wiped off. We found one that actually had, I guess nobody had eaten there all day, and we landed there and just waited and waited and waited. And we looked up there to see what they were doing, and all the workers and employees, primarily teenagers, were all on their cell phones, just texting, scrolling. I'm like, where's my food? I go up there and I ask, is our food waiting? Now, at this time, I'm getting moody. Men, can you identify? I'm hungry, and my food's not out. At this point, they got on it, and they brought us the food. Oh man, I couldn't wait to bite in this burger. And as I unwrapped the burger and stuck it in my mouth, what met my lips was a nice cold hamburger that had been sitting somewhere for the last, 15, 20 minutes. Now, have you ever had an experience like that? Let me tell you something. That is the result of apathy, neglect, indifference. I actually journaled that night. I said, may this never happen at Hillview Baptist Church. When I saw Burger King tonight in Tampa. What we see here is the opposite of what I experienced there in Tampa. We see in Nehemiah a spiritual leader who took spiritual initiative. Now, it's been a couple weeks since we talked about spiritual leadership, so I want to give to you this definition of spiritual leadership so we have this before our hearts going into tonight. A spiritual leader is a servant who uses his credibility to inspire others to fulfill their God-given potential. Now, notice what words were not in that definition. It doesn't say deacon. It doesn't say associate pastor. It doesn't say pastor. It doesn't say overseer or coordinator. It says a servant who uses his or her credibility to inspire others to fulfill their God-given potential. Let me put it bluntly, brothers and sisters. You are called to be a spiritual leader as a child of God. You're called to be an influencer. In your world, in your workplace, in your neighborhood, God wants you to serve others in a way that He uses your testimony, your credibility to influence others for their God-given potential. So what's going on in the book of Nehemiah for him to be this spiritual leader? The year is 444 BC. We don't have a lot of biblical writings around this time. Most of them focused in the centuries before, leading up to the fall of Israel and later the southern kingdom, Judah, which happened around 600 BC. We're talking a lot of water under the bridge from the time that Babylon took away the people of God out of Jerusalem to this point. We're dealing 150 years. A lot has happened. But in that 150-year time, they've completed their 7 years of exile, and a lot of people have gone back to Jerusalem. A lot of the Jewish people have gone back to Jerusalem. You can read about that in the book of Ezra. But here in Nehemiah, you have this obscure Jewish man that is far off, 900 plus miles from Jerusalem, serving in the palace of a king of Persia. He's in the palace of Shushan in the month of Chislew, and he's just carrying out his royal responsibilities. He is the king's cupbearer. Now, we don't know all that went into that, but the cupbearer was a trusted individual who would basically make sure that the drink isn't spiked, maybe test the food, make sure nobody's poisoning the king. I mean, if somebody's mad at the king's cupbearer, they can really seek vengeance on him, right? Because he's protecting the king. The king's cupbearer is going to go first before the king goes. So this is his responsibility. He's a confidant. He's a counselor. He's worked his way up, wouldn't you say? He isn't just down and outer. He's royalty. He's serving next to the most powerful man of the known world, the king of Persia. So as we have seen the background, let's pick up in verse 1 so we can understand the context here. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, so he's the author of this book, and you're going to see the first person come in throughout the book. It says, "And it came to pass in the month of Chislew, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace, that Hanani, one of my brethren," talking about he's a fellow Jew, "came, and he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept, and mourned certain days, and fasted, and prayed before the God of heaven." This evening, I want to talk to you about spiritual initiative that we see in this godly man, Nehemiah. The first example Nehemiah sets before us is that spiritual leaders look for the spiritual need. They look for the spiritual need. They're not just aware. They're not just on their heels hoping some spiritual need smacks them upside the head. They're looking for a spiritual need. And we see Nehemiah doing this in verses 1 and 2. Now here he is serving the king, a pagan king, who did not worship his God, had a totally different value system that he had. And one of his brothers, as we can see here, Hanani, comes in with a sour countenance. Well, Nehemiah, not wanting to open up a can of worms, but yet wanting to open up a can of worms, wanting to know what's going on here with his brother Hanani, says, "Hey, bro, what's going on? I see your countenance has fallen. What's bothering you?" Notice the initiative he's taking here. He's not passive. He's not trying to run from a problem. He's pursuing it. He's heading towards the issue, the need, not knowing exactly what he's getting himself into. Well, notice how he asks specifically about the people of God, the Jews, that were back in Jerusalem. Now, again, did I tell you? 900 miles away. This isn't, how are those brothers doing in Eugene? How are those brothers doing up in Portland? How are those brothers doing over in that red state, Idaho? No, 900 miles away. And here they are looking at each other, and Hanani gives the answer. Notice the specifics in verse 3. The remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are thriving and things are amazing. That's the wrong version of the Bible, if that's what your Bible says. No, it says, in great affliction and reproach. So he, first of all, focuses on the people of God and says they are suffering. They have completed their 70-year exile. That's been decades before that they completed that. And now they're back in Jerusalem. And you would say this is that promised land, way back in the book of Joshua. This is the land of Canaan. All these victories. But here they are, suffering. But notice what he gets to next. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. This goes way back to what the Babylonians had done 150 years before. Now, if you read the book of Ezra, which precedes Nehemiah, you find that they've already gone back to Jerusalem to build the temple. And they've done that. And through much chagrin, much toil, through some whiplash, the king stopping it and then starting again, they built the temple. But they had neglected the wall all around it, making the people susceptible to outside attacks. But what weighed most on Nehemiah's heart was not the fact that the temple was not protected. It made the city of God look bad. And if the city of God looks bad, that reflected on God's reputation. What bothered Nehemiah was not the fact that his brothers were just suffering. It wasn't bothering the fact that just the walls were a little torn around and there's an apathy or neglect. What weighed heavily upon him, and you're going to see this throughout his prayer, is that the name of his God, from a human standpoint, was not being seen. He was not being glorified. He wasn't being honored. There was no excellence about that name, no magnificence about that name. If anything, it seemed from a human standpoint, it was at risk of being thrown under the mud. And he wanted to do something about that. He couldn't stand for God's reputation to be marred in other people's minds, so that outsiders walking along the city of Jerusalem would say, oh, we remembered them. Yeah. They got destroyed by the Babylonians, and now they come back. Look at them. Is this the kind of God they serve that would let their people suffer like this? Oh, Nehemiah's just replaying this. He's using imagination as the Gentiles in that area would pass by and mock the name of God as they looked at the ruined city with the walls laying in ruins. But like a spiritual leader, he looked for the spiritual need. Now, any of you kids like owls? How many of you like owls? Raise your hand if you like owls. And by the way, kids, be listening because you listen very well. I'm going to hit the pause button in a little while, and I might just ask you some questions with some reward. So be listening. You might want to take some notes, okay? So when it comes to an owl, what do you know about an owl that's different than other birds? Talk to me for a moment. What do you know about an owl that's different from other birds? Charity? Now, that's right. Can anybody tell me to the degrees that an owl can turn its head? It's not 360. It looks like it, not quite 360. Anybody tell me? Lily? Yeah, they can go backwards, but there's a number of degrees. Brother Dan, it's like on the edge of your tongue there. I can see it there. It's actually 270 degrees. You want to try that? I'm going to look at you. No, I mean, it's about 180 for us people. I mean, we struggle at 180 degrees, just going side to side. And like the more we age, the more it kind of comes down to maybe 90 degrees as far as what we can turn our head. But an owl, 270 degrees. That's amazing, isn't it? And they have a single socket pivot, if you want to get technical about what's going on, where we got like a double socket. There's a couple hinge points with our neck that hinders us. But a single pivot point allows them to totally take in their surroundings. What Nehemiah is doing here, he is exercising the head of an owl spiritually. He's looking around, using that 270 degrees to say, what's the need? I'm going to find exactly what's going on here. And then I want to do something about it. Now, before we go any further and even apply this, aren't you glad that Jesus Christ, the Son, in eternity past, he had the same vision in a sense of an owl and would look around and saw your plight, your condition, and want to do something about it. And he entered this planet and confined himself to an infant's body and lived among us. That's spiritual leadership. That's initiative modeled by none other than God incarnate, Jesus Christ. But here's the hurdle that we face. Often when we see a spiritual need or physical need, we take the jaded mindset, it is what it is. That's not going to change. It's been there like that for how many years? How many months? Nothing's going to change even if I try to do anything about it. It is what it is. Now, I realize there are some things out of our control. I get that. And some things are, as Stephen Covey said years ago, are in our circle of concern, but not in our circle of influence. I understand that. But when something's in our circle of influence, like we can do something about it and we have the power to do something about it, that's not an is what it is. That's an opportunity. Now, let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about here. As you pull on site for a church service, you look in the parking lot like a sister did last Sunday morning and you see a mess in the corner of the parking lot. It is what it is. I must have been there a long time. Well, actually, it wasn't. Because I would never let that happen if I drive off the property on Saturday afternoon before I come back on Sunday morning. And I'm thankful that a sister saw that and didn't leave it there and came and told us, say, hey, could we clean this up? And like she was ready to go at it and clean this thing up. You see, that's having the head of an owl and just looking around. By the way, isn't this our church property? It's not my church property. It's our church home. We all have ownership of this to keep it clean. If there's a need or a mess or weeds growing up or whatever it might be, let's do something about it. But it could be that as you enter the church building, you look up and you see a sister who looks a little sad. And you get around this sister and man, she's complaining and complaining and complaining and complaining. And it's negativity and negativity and negativity. And you're like, this ain't right. Something's off. And your head's straining to look at it a little bit more. You're looking into this. You're pondering this. It could be your coworker that you see has been a little dishonest and going behind the boss's back and maybe cheating some time out of the company. And you're aware of this. And you see that there's a little attitude that goes along with it that's kind of arrogant. It could be your own teen child, that they're just distant with their attitude. And the response to mom or dad has been less than respectful. They got a little chip on their shoulder. And you want to definitely look into this a little bit more. That's something you shouldn't look away from. Or it could be you in your walk with God. You're becoming aware that God is not speaking to you from the Word like He did 6 months ago. You're just not being moved through the preaching, through the fellowship. And by the way, when that's happening, that's usually not a circumstantial phenomenon. There's usually something going on in our heart. It could be health, it could be other things at times in our lives, but more times than not, it's something going on in our heart. Like our perspective is distracted, we're focusing on the wrong thing, something's going on here. You see the need. So you're all together. Is the shoe size getting close as far as the scenario you've been in? There's something in your world or something in your own heart that is lacking. It's within your reach to at least touch it, to grab a hold of it, to act. Spiritual leaders look for the spiritual need. But how would Nehemiah respond? He already inquired of this. He heard the bad news. Notice how he responds. He responds like a spiritual leader would. He took the God-glorifying lead. He took the God-glorifying lead. Now let's go through his prayer to see how he approached this in a God-glorifying way. Look what it says in verse 4. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Okay, if there's a word, if you like writing words next to your Bible, maybe in your column next to the text, here's a word you can write. He was upset. He was troubled. This bothered him. Now, we can see from this that it bothered him that the name of God was being mocked. The people of God were suffering. But let me ask you a question. What bothers you? What bothers you? Well, for Jonah, it was his gourd. I talked about that last week. That bothered him. He got more angry about the gourd than a bunch of people, 600,000 going to hell. Nineveh. What bothers you? Your Wi-Fi doesn't work? You open up the refrigerator and the snack that you hope was there is not there? The milk has gone sour? Yeah, these can make for a moody day. I get it. But how many times is it a spiritual factor that bothers us, that troubles us? Something that would really bother the heart of God. Like a sister who's struggling, or a brother that has a bad attitude, or an unsaved person who's in our circle of influence that continues to look the other way from God, the one who made him. Do those things bother you? They trouble you? But notice what Nehemiah did. He didn't just say, oh man, let me take note and get back to that next week. He stopped what he was doing. He sat down and he wept. That's not the manly thing to do, to weep. No, he was that troubled. He wept. And then what does he do? He fasts. He's like, I'm not even in the mood to eat food. I know I'm the king's cupbearer. I'll go ahead and test the wine as needed, but I'm not going to enjoy my regular food. I'm not going to have regular nutrients so I can seek my God. And then he prayed before the God of heaven. So there's weeping and mourning, there's fasting, and then there's prayer to the God of heaven. And the rest of the chapter is simply that prayer. And that's what I want to look at. Notice how he starts this prayer with adoration. I beseech thee, O Lord God of heaven, the great and terrible God, that keepeth covenant and mercy for them that love him and observe his commandments. He's identifying the right God, isn't he? He's exclaiming God's power. First of all, that you are great and terrible. Like, we ought to fear you. It's not terrible like he's a bad God, but it is terrifying to be on the wrong side of God. We fear him. And it goes on and explains that he keeps his covenant. He follows through. But not only his covenant, but his mercy, because those who are part of his covenant don't deserve the blessings of that covenant, and that love him and observe his commandments. So he bends close to his people that are responsive to him. And so he makes his first request in verse 6. Let thine ear now be attentive and thine eyes open, that thou mayest hear the prayer of thy servant, which I pray before thee now, day and night, for the children of Israel, thy servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against thee. Both I and my father's house have sinned. Now, a couple things in verse 6. He's not even do the real request. You know how your kids say, Mom, can I ask you something? Like, can you go and say yes to what I'm going to ask you? Have you ever had your kids do it like my kids do to me? It's the ask before the ask. There's so much reverence in Nehemiah's heart towards his God. He's asking before the ask. He's saying, God, would you see fit to listen? Because we do not deserve your listening ear. Would you be gracious to bend a little lower, stoop down, listen to my concern? And notice the next thing that he highlights here, because I'm going to confess. We, this people and I, we've sinned against you. Now notice he's not confessing other people's sins. We're experts at that. As we hear the preaching, yeah, forgive sister so-and-so for what she did to me because she really needs this preaching right now. Or that brother over there, I hope he's listening, and I'm going to intercede that you be merciful to that brother because he really needs that truth that's being pounded from the pulpit right now. No, that's what Nehemiah is saying here. He says, I'm in the camp. I've sinned. First person plural. By the way, that's a great posture of confession. First person plural. Hey, we have sinned as a nation, as a people. God, we have done you wrong. He's already implying, God, forgive us for this. Now notice verse 7. We have dealt very corruptly against thee, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments, which thou commandedst thy servant Moses. Notice there's no blame shifting. He's not accusing the forefathers for unbelief. He's saying, hey, we have disobeyed you, Lord. You gave us tables of stone on Mount Sinai. You gave us your law through Moses, and we have not kept that for the last several hundred years. We have disobeyed you, Lord. Look at what it says in verse 8. Now I beseech you, or remember I beseech thee, the word that thou commandest thy servant Moses, saying, if ye transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations. But if ye turn unto me and keep my commandments and do them, though there were of you cast out unto the uttermost part of the heaven, yet will I gather them from thence and bring them unto the place that I have chosen to set my name there. Now, I love how he shifts channels. By the way, this is a big factor in praying. God, forgive us. We've sinned. No blame shifting. We're not pointing the finger. All the fingers are pointing at us, myself included. We have sinned against you. Now, God, remember your promise that you gave to Abraham? And you gave again to Moses, and that you even gave later to David and Solomon. Remember that promise? That if we keep your commandments and we turn back towards you, that you'll be merciful to us. You remember that, God? Oh, yeah, of course God didn't forget that. He's saying it for his sake. He's recalling it to his mind, and he's going to base his prayer on the Scriptures. Powerful principle here. Your most potent prayers before the throne of God are based on the truth of God, not some figment of your imagination or some pipe dream that you have as far as the future. It's based on the Scriptures. And here he is. God, you promised this, remember? You promised this. And so notice, he's not even quite to the request yet. He's doing another ask before the ask. Look what it says in verse 10. Now these are thy servants and thy people whom thou hast redeemed by thy great power and by thy strong hand. Now he's building a case. He's saying, okay, now God, you commanded this, but also remember all that you put into this. Remember these people are the ones who represent your name, like your reputation is on the line with your people. Here's the request. O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant and to the desire of thy servant, or the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name. And prosper, I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Whew. This is a long prayer with an itty-bitty request at the end. Have you picked up on that? Let's review this prayer. I mean, this is a good pattern for us at times. Okay, God, can I ask you something? To ask before the ask. Then there's the confession. Oh, we don't deserve it. We don't deserve it, Lord. We've sinned against you, first person plural. God, do you remember your promises? Remember your promises that you've given us? You promised that if we turn back to you, you'll be merciful to us. And by the way, God, you have put your name on us as a people, so your dealings with us is reflective of your name. You're concerned about your name. And then, oh, by the way, Lord, can I ask you something? Again, another ask before the ask. And the final prayer is this. heading into the end of the chapter, he says, Lord, can you give me mercy in the sight of the king? One request. That's it. There's the ask before the ask. There's the adoration. There's the confession. There's the recalling of God's promises. There's the ask before the ask. And then, God, would you please be merciful, specifically when I interact with the king? And then it concludes the chapter by saying, for I was the king's cupbearer. In other words, God, you put me in this position for this moment and help me to steward it well. He embraced his position as a spiritual leader who could do something about it. It was within his reach, and he was just asking God, as I reach out to take some action here, please be merciful to me in this effort and help the king to respond. Spiritual leaders take God-glorifying lead. Do you see that in this passage? He is so passionate about God's reputation and God's name. He can't stand the thought of anybody talking ill of his God or not knowing his God. He wanted the pagans to see who God really was. But unfortunately, many believers take the mindset of four people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. Have you heard the story? It's probably been a few days, years, decades since you've heard it. So I'm going to go and share you this story again. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have. Does that sound like any environment you've been in before? That's not Nehemiah right here. He's not anybody, somebody, everybody. He is a spiritual leader, and he's going to take some action that you'll have to read about in the coming chapters because we don't have time to explore exactly what happened later after chapter 1. But going back to some of those scenarios. So you see the mess, and you just take the initiative and clean it up. You see the weed, you take the initiative and you pull the weed. You see the trash or the stain on the carpet, you get the spot treatment and you clean that up. You're not just trying to, wait for somebody else to do it. Or that sister that is just struggling with their attitude and going through a lot. You take the initiative to listen, but also at the right time, as appropriate, to give some exhortation to help the perspective with that. Because it could be that sister, her perspective is off in that moment. Or it could be that coworker that is being dishonest and you see it costing your boss. So you take the initiative by encouraging your coworker first to see if he responds. And if he doesn't respond, then it might mean going and talking to your supervisor to let him know what's going on, knowing that you already tried. You already tried to talk to him directly. This isn't something where you're going around his back. Or it could be a teenager. Your teenager that's distancing himself. Might mean taking the initiative to come home from work a little earlier or to give up some of that hobby time that you enjoy so much to reconnect with that child whose heart is straying from where it should be. This is the job of a spiritual leader. Or it could be your own devotions where it's gone stagnant and it's been dry and you know your heart isn't where it should be. It might mean taking some initiative like fasting, setting some food aside for a day, multiple meals, or 2 days to cry out to God to revive your heart in your own personal devotional life. But spiritual leaders, they look for the spiritual need and they take the God-glorifying lead. Now, we got just a few more minutes. Got about 5 minutes here. I want to ask the kids because I promised them I'd do this. So kids, I got to ask you a couple questions. This is kids only, okay? No grown-up kids now. These are just kids. So I want to make sure the kids are listening because I got something here called some Kit Kats I'd love to share. Okay, kids, what bad news bothered Nehemiah? What's the bad news that bothered Nehemiah? Can you remember? What bad news bothered Nehemiah at the very beginning of the story? Hannah and I came in and told him some bad news. What was the bad news? Oh no. Were the kids space cadets? Were they space cadets? Oh, I get it. Caleb, you know what it is? Did somebody tell you that answer? Here you go, Katrina. You can share it if you want. Okay, here's another question. Now, this was after I gave you the heads up. I might have a little blessing here. Okay, you ready for this? How did Nehemiah respond to the bad news? How did he respond to the bad news? Were you listening? Lena, how did he respond to the bad news? He was mad. Yeah, he was a little anxious. He was upset. He was troubled. Well, that's close enough. I kind of described that. Come on up, sister. Here you go. All right. Now, one other question. This is for all kids, what is a need that you have seen around your house or the church? Like maybe there's a mess, maybe there's something going on, something that your mom can't get to, your siblings can't get to. What is a need around your house? You got, what is it? Okay, and how do you handle that, Charity? Every time, right? Every time. Okay, you want to come up and get this? And then I can open up for one more kid. Do you see any needs around your house or around? You got something, Lily? Okay, so mess around your house. Okay, you want a little Kit Kat? Can you come up and handle this? I don't want to risk hitting Miss Pat in the head. Logan, did you have something as well? What's a need that you've seen? You saw an animal? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, way to go. Way to watch out for your family. Good job, Logan. Okay, that's great. Now, we're out of time. We're going to pick it up. We'll have another opportunity here at a later time. We got to land this plane. Okay, so you kids, you listening as we approach the runway here? Here's a twofold challenge I want to give to you tonight as we wrap up our time. Twofold challenge based on what we've seen in the book of Nehemiah. First of all, cultivate your concern for God's glory. Is that a concern of yours? Cultivate your concern for God's name and God's reputation. You say, what do you mean by this? Beware of carnal initiative. You say, what do you mean carnal initiative? Well, like serving God for self-glory or doing something spiritual, but it's really for your own glory. It's for your own ego. It's for your own benefit, not necessarily for the benefit of others. You say, how do you know if that's the case? When you don't get thanked or appreciated, does it make you irked and upset? That could be a red flag as far as the motives. Like, why are we doing this? Here's another one. Galatians 2:20 backs this up. Doing all we can for God's glory. Paul said, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. We ought to be dead to ourselves and alive to the glory of God. Here's the second thing. Not only cultivate your concern for God's glory, but take initiative through prayer and action. Take initiative through prayer and action. Notice the order there. Prayer, then action, not action, then prayer. That's the ideal. Now, what do you mean by that? When you see a need, when you see a sister struggling, like I mentioned a few moments ago, it's better to pray first rather than to open up your mouth. Have you ever opened up your mouth without praying? What happened? So pray. That's what Nehemiah is doing here before he takes action. He prays. And then you ponder a solution. You ponder a solution. As you pray about it, you think this through. Remember, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. That implies in James 1:19 that I'm pondering this. I'm calculating my words. I'm calculating my actions here before I jump. So pray, ponder the solution, and then act or propose a solution to those who oversee this area. I mean, for example, if it's a big mess and it's going to and it's something that would affect a different overseer or an owner in the church family, then it's probably good to communicate first, right? Rather than running over there if it's going to negatively affect or adversely affect them. They need to be in the loop on what's going on. But then, once you propose that, you're in there helping, trying to clean up whatever might be going on. So you pray, you ponder a solution, and then you act or propose. So let's bring all this together. Spiritual initiative. You look for the spiritual need, and then you take the God-glorifying lead. I'm telling you, this principle right here, and the level of acting upon this that we take after tonight in many ways determines how far we go as a church. Because the church moves forward as the members take initiative. Not just the pastor, not just the leadership team of some kind, but as church members, children of God, take initiative to see the needs around them and take a God-glorifying lead. God works through that. Now, you say, what happens in the book of Nehemiah? Read it for your devotions tomorrow in the coming days. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag. Read it for yourself. It's an amazing story and what they are able to do because Nehemiah took some spiritual initiative. Let's go and stand together as we conclude our time this evening.